Hello, I'm Naomi Lewin. Welcome to Classics for Kids. Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov didn't want to be a composer when he grew up. He wanted to join the Navy. Rimsky-Korsakov was born in 1844 in a town just east of St. Petersburg, Russia. There was a lot of music in the household. Rimsky-Korsakov's parents played the piano and sang, and he loved opera. But he had a much older brother, 22 years older, who was a Navy officer, so that's what Rimsky-Korsakov wanted to do too. When he went to the Naval Academy, he studied music on the side and met up with a group of composers who were writing Russian classical music. By then, Rimsky-Korsakov had started working on a symphony and wanted to forget about the Navy. But his brother said, no way. So off he went on a 3-year tour of duty to exotic places like London, Brazil, and New York. While he was on board ship, Rimsky-Korsakov kept working on his symphony. When he finally got back home, his friend and fellow composer Mily Balakirev conducted it. People in the audience loved the symphony, but they were pretty surprised to see the composer wearing a Navy uniform. Rimsky-Korsakov and 4 of his composer friends started hanging out together so much that they became known as the Mighty Five, or Mighty Handful, as in 5 fingers. Rimsky-Korsakov quit the Navy and was invited to teach at the St. Petersburg Conservatory, which is now called the Rimsky-Korsakov Conservatory. When he was first asked to teach music, Rimsky-Korsakov realized that his own music education had been pretty terrible. So he studied very hard, very fast, always keeping just about 1 lesson ahead of his students. Rimsky-Korsakov turned out to be a very good teacher, starting at home. Not only did he teach himself how to compose and conduct, he also became an expert at orchestration, giving musical color to a piece by deciding which instruments should play what parts. Rimsky-Korsakov loved to tell stories with music. One of his best is about a person who was also an expert storyteller, Scheherazade, who kept herself from getting killed for 1,001 nights by telling a different story every night. As a kid, Rimsky-Korsakov loved opera, and as a grown-up, he still did. He wrote about 12 of them. One of his operas is based on music history, the story of composers Mozart and Salieri.
Oh, Mozart, Mozart. Aha!
Other Rimsky-Korsakov operas are based on Russian history, like The Tsar's Bride, about a woman Ivan the Terrible wants to marry. And then there are the operas Rimsky-Korsakov based on Russian fairy tales. Next week, I'll tell you the whole story of Tsar Sultan. The Flight of the Bumblebee by Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov comes from an opera called The Tale of Tsar Saltan. But that's not the whole name of the opera, which just might be the longest in all of operadom. Next time, the full name and the full story of Tsar Saltan. I'm Naomi Lewin. I write classics for kids and produce it with Tim Lanter at WGUC Cincinnati. Please join me again for more Classics for Kids. Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov wrote The Flight of the Bumblebee for an opera called The Tale of Tsar Saltan. Actually, that's just the Reader's Digest abridged version of the title. The full Monty is The Legend of Tsar Saltan, of his son, the famous and mighty hero Prince Gvidan Sultanovich, and of the beautiful Swan Princess. And if that title weren't enough, the plot is one of the most complicated in all of operadom, and that's saying a lot. The Tale of Tsar Saltan is based on a story by the great Russian poet Alexander Pushkin. Once upon a time, 3 sisters sat around discussing what they would do if they were married to the Tsar. That's Russian for ruler of the country. The first sister said she would make a huge feast. The second sister said she would weave beautiful cloth. And the third sister said she would bear Tsar Saltan a strong, brave son. The Tsar was listening in on the conversation and promptly married the sister who said she'd bear him a son. Then he told the feast sister she could be the palace cook and the cloth sister that she could be the royal weaver. They were not amused. Pretty soon, the newly married Tsarina, or Mrs. Tsar, was expecting a child. But before the baby was born, her husband had to go off to war. After the Tsar left, the Tsarina had a baby boy, known as the Tsarevich, or son of Tsar. The Tsarina sent her husband a message saying that they'd had a beautiful, healthy son, but her jealous sisters substituted a different message saying that she'd given birth to a monster. When he heard that, the Tsar was very unhappy and sent back a message saying not to do anything until he got home. But the sisters intercepted that message too, and substituted one saying that the Tsarina and her son should be put into a barrel and thrown into the sea. Because this is a fairy tale, not only did they survive, but the boy actually grew up hour by hour as the barrel tossed on the water. When mother and son washed ashore on an island, the first thing the Tsarevich did was save the life of an enchanted swan. The swan thanked him by making a beautiful city appear, and Prince Gvidon, as the Tsarevich was now known, became ruler of that city. By now, you're probably saying, I thought there was supposed to be a flying bee somewhere in this story. So far, the only thing with wings has been an enchanted swan. Well, to make a long story not quite as long, some people who traveled through Prince Gvidon's city told him about Tsar Saltan's kingdom. And Tsar Saltan heard from those same travelers about the amazing place where Prince Gvidon lived. So each of them really wanted to visit the other. Prince Gvidon got there first with help from the enchanted swan, who let him pay 3 visits in disguise, first as a mosquito, then as a fly, and then, you guessed it, as a bee. When Tsar Saltan got to visit the prince, he was delighted to see his long-lost son and all the miraculous things in Prince Gvidon's city. There was a squirrel that pulled emerald nuts out of golden shells. A band of 33 knights that marched out of the ocean in shining armor. princess more beautiful than the sun, with moonlight in her hair and starlight in her face. Of course, the princess was the enchanted swan, freed from her spell and changed back to a human being. Naturally, she and the prince got married and lived happily ever after.